Hi, this is Mr. Gillum, and we're going to continue on with lesson 4, and we're going to talk about constant speed today. The question says, Bill drove 200 miles in 4 hours. At this speed, how long will it take him to drive 300 miles? How long will it take him to drive 400 miles? And again, we have more than one question to answer here. And so we have a lot of different ways that we can approach this problem. One of the ways that we can approach the problem is figure out the unit rate of how far he can go in 1 hour. And so to do that, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this here in a little bit, if he can go 200 miles in 4 hours, then he must be able to go 50 miles in 1 hour. And we could find everything we need to know using the unit rate as far as how long it'll take him to drive 400 miles. But we could also use another strategy called a double number line. And the thing about a double number line is it leaves space and increments in the appropriate spots. So in a table, if we were making a table, it might look like this. You can see that I rewrote this double number line as a table, and I left out this blank here. In a double number line, it leaves gaps for every value, and in a table, sometimes it doesn't. It just keeps the same equivalent ratios the whole time. So one of the benefits of a double number line is it leaves gaps, and everything is spaced evenly. Okay, so when I look at this, it gives me the initial values that it says in the problem: 200 miles in 4 hours. Okay, 200 miles in 4 hours. And it goes on to say down below here that you know that in 4 hours, Bill travels 200 miles. The same vertical line is labeled with 200 miles in 4 hours. If you divide both quantities by 2, you find that in 2 hours, he can travel 100 miles. So if I divide by 2, that gives me the 100, and it gives me the 2. If I divide those by 2 again, then I know that he can. If I divide by 2 again, then I can see that he can go 50 miles in 1 hour. And that's what I identified here as well with the unit rate of how many miles he can go per 1 hour. All right. So it says that one way you can use the quantities labeled on the double number line is to complete the rest of it. So fill in the blanks below and then finish labeling the number line. So I'm going to go back and forth between these two slides here a few times. It says that 3 hours equals 2 hours plus 1 hour, and blank miles equals 100 miles plus 50 miles. So we're going to start with an addition. I know that 1 plus 2 would equal 3, and so 50 plus 100 would equal 150. Okay, so I'm using an addition pattern for the first part here. It then says 5 hours equals 2 hours plus 3 hours, and blank miles equals 100 miles plus 150 miles. So again, I'm going to look at this double number line, and I see that I need to figure out what this number would be. 2 plus 3, that equals 5. And so 100 plus 150 would equal 250. 6 hours equals 2 hours times 3, and blank miles equals 100 miles times 3. So we can also use a multiplication pattern. So if I'm looking for 6 here, should be the next counting number in the order here, I could do a 3 plus 3 or a 4 plus 2. There's a lot of things I could do. It suggests that one of the patterns we can use is we can say, oh, well, 3 times 2 is 6, so 150 times 2 would equal 300. It says the rate is 50 miles for each 1 hour. We call that the rate. The unit rate would be 50. Bill can drive 5 times 7 or blank miles in 7 hours, and 50 times 8 or blank miles in 8 hours. And so what they're doing is they're saying, okay, well, if I know that in 1 hour he can go 50 miles, then in 7 hours, that would be 1 times 7, 50 times 7 would be the value I can put in there, which is 350. With the double number line, you're probably seeing other patterns besides these as well, but this is just an example. And we could do the same thing for 8. Multiply 50 times 8 to equal 400. Again, I'm saying, okay, 1 times 8 would equal 8. And so 50 times 8 would equal 400. All right. I see an add 50 pattern. I see an add 1 pattern. I see a corresponding pattern. Every number on the bottom times 50 equals the number on the top. So there's a lot of patterns here and a lot of ways to figure out the values on a double number line. And I just want to emphasize that the only numbers that we started with were the initial values of 200 miles in 4 hours. So now that we have our chart filled out, and this one's a lot less sloppy, it says, what does the double number line show as the unit rate? The unit rate is per 1. So in this case, per 1 hour, I see that it is 50 per 1 hour, so the unit rate would just be the number 50. It says, show how to use the ratio in the given problem to find the unit rate. Well, how could I use 200 to 4 to find the unit rate? Well, of course, I would divide by 4. And I would know that 50 to 1 is the related rate, so 200 divided by 4 would equal 50. That represents the unit rate, just the first part of the ratio when being compared to 1. It says, how can you use the unit rate to solve the problem? Well, we talked about this as well. There are 2 answers that we need to find. It says, how long will it take him to drive 300 miles? How long will it take him to drive 400 miles? So we're going to have to think about this a little differently than we have in the past. If we're trying to figure out how long it takes him to drive 300 miles, and I know that 50 miles takes 1 hour, I need to know how many 50s fit into 300. That will tell me how many hours it takes me, because each one of these represents 1 hour. Okay, so how many 50s fit into 300 represents how many hours I will have altogether. So 50 I know goes into 300 6 times. So I'm going to say that that answer to how long it takes him to drive 300 miles would be 6 hours. I can confirm that again with my double number line. And then again it asks how long for 400 miles. Again, if we have 400 miles to go and I know that every 50 miles takes 1 hour, then I know that it will take 8 hours. So instead of using multiplication like we did to fill out our double number line, we can use division to find the solution to both of these problems as well. Sorry. All right. Divide 300 miles and 400 miles by 50 to find how many hours it would take to drive each distance, 6 hours and 8 hours. It says, suppose you want to know how long it will take Bill to drive 325 miles. How can you use the double number line to do this? Okay, so in the double number line, it's spaced evenly all the way through. And there's some things I know about the number 325. I don't see it on the number line anywhere, but I know that it would fall exactly halfway in between 300 and 350. Because 325 is exactly halfway between 300 and 350, I know that it would take exactly between 6 and 7 hours to drive that far. So in this case, I would know that it would be 6 1/2 hours. Okay, 6 1/2 hours. 6 1/2 is exactly between 6 and 7. So it says, look at the hours, 6 and 7. The time that is halfway between the numbers is 6 1/2 hours. Okay, so it's just exactly halfway in between. So describe how you can use the unit rate to find how long it will take Bill to drive 325 miles. Okay, so to use the unit rate, we would have to do a little different. The unit rate we've decided is 50 miles per 1 hour. Okay, 50 miles per 1 hour. So if I do 325 divided by 50, that's 1 hour for every 50 miles, I'll be able to find how long it takes. Now, again, I can do long division here, but it's really not going to be very useful. I know that it goes, 50 will go into 325 6 times, and 50 will go into 250 5 times. So 6.5 hours, or we could say 6 hours and 30 minutes. So again, using the unit rate, instead of using multiplication with the unit rate, we needed to actually use division with the unit rate. Let's see if I can do this the right way. Get rid of that. Okay. Yeah, no peeking. Okay, there we go. You could divide 325 by 50 to get 6.5. How is solving a problem about constant speed similar to solving a problem about unit price? How are these types of problems different? Okay, so you can solve these types of problems in the same way by using a table, by using a double number line, by using a unit rate. But the difference is that when it's a unit price problem, darn it, they involve money, and constant speed problems involve different units of time and distance. Okay, it's just really they're the same type of problem when you consider the unit rate, the ways you can solve them, the table, the double number line, but we're just not talking about a unit price, which is a money value. We're talking about distance and time instead. So this is a different problem than the one we've been talking about this entire time, and it says that a jet plane flew 1,200 miles in 3 hours. At this rate, how far will it travel in 2 hours? Okay, so there's a lot of strategies we can do here. I can do a double number line, and I can say, okay, well, it'll put time as almost always. I'm not going to say that. We'll make time on the bottom and we'll do the miles on the top. And it looks to me like right now we have 1,200 miles for 3 hours. Okay, so let's do 2 and 1 represents the unit rate. I can divide 1,200 by 3 and 3 by 3 to get the unit rate. In this case, that would be 400 miles in 1 hour. So I know that the plane is traveling 400 miles in 1 hour. So all I need to do is figure out how far it's traveling in 2 hours. Well, I know that if this is the value I'm looking for, and in 1 hour they can go 400, then in 2 hours they must be able to go 800. And so using the double number line, I can quickly find that value. The table would be very similar to this, and the unit rate way I could find it is similar as well. It's all very, very similar. Any of the ways you want to think about the problem would be appropriate, but I'm warning you that if you only know how to do it one way, you may come into a problem that doesn't lend itself well to solving it your way. If you're just a table person, you may have to use a unit rate sometime. So that's why we're practicing a lot of different ways to solve these problems. It says a small plane flew 240 miles in 2 hours. At that rate, how long will it take to travel 600 miles? Okay, so now these numbers aren't going to be near as smooth to work with. And so I'm going to make a double number line, or I can make a table. And I'm going to put the miles on the top and the time on the bottom. And so it looks to me like I have 240 miles in 2 hours. Okay, let's start with how far I could go in 1 hour. Let's figure that out. So if I divide 2 by 2, I can find 1. If I divide 240 by 2, that's 120. Now this represents the unit rate, how far they can go in 1 hour. So if I want to know how far it took them to go in 600 miles, I could use that unit rate by saying, okay, well, if there's 600 miles, if I divide that evenly into 120, I know that represents 1 hour of time, then I can figure out that, oh, it's going to take 5 hours. Each 120 miles that goes into 600 takes 1 hour. There are 5 120s in 600, so it'll take 5 hours. I could, because I'm looking for 600, I could say, okay, well, there's 3, there's 4, 5. Let's see what happens. 1 plus 2 would be 3, so 120 plus 240 would be 360. I could say, okay, well, 2 plus 3, I wouldn't even need to have the 4, would get me to 5. So 240 plus 360 would equal 600. So even though I have an incomplete double number line, I can still see that the value will be 5 hours for 600 miles. And that's it for today.